there are many people who have been questioning whether or not raising Cornish crosses from a sustainability perspective is the best approach when raising meat birds. And I think even before all of this came about, anybody that was relatively new to raising Cornish cross birds did eventually ask the question, is it possible for me to have a rooster and hens and hatch out my own meat birds? This is the Homestead Journey Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the pursuit of self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Homestead Journey Podcast. This is episode number 130. My name is Brian Wells. I am coming to you from 3B Farm and Homestead here in beautiful and steamy upstate New York. Folks, the dial has been cranked way up. We hit mid 90s, I think, yesterday. We've hit mid 90s again today. In fact, it chased me indoors. I was out working in the garden this afternoon, and I finally said, enough is enough. We have some thunderstorms inbound this evening, so I'm trying to get this podcast recorded before the thunderstorms take the power out. Hopefully we'll be able to get through this. So let's hop on over to this week's Homestead happenings, and I'll bring you up to speed with what we've been doing here on 3B Farm and Homestead. Before I jump into what we've been doing here on 3B Farm and Homestead, I wanted to shout out a listener of this podcast who tagged me this week over on Instagram. It's actually Start Small Homestead. And if you are on Instagram, I really highly encourage you. I almost want to say I demand pause this podcast and go to Instagram and look up Start Small Homestead. It is amazing to me what they are doing. And one of the things that you will see is in the, I don't know what you call it. I don't know their description. I'm not really good with this stuff, but this is how they describe what they've got going. I have an 8x10 patio. I can't plant in the ground. There are big obstacles in my teeny space, but I'm homesteading anyway. Some dreams start small. They tagged me in this picture and actually it's a group of pictures of their patio and the things that they are doing on. It's just amazing. They're growing in totes. They're growing in containers. They've got a pool ladder that they've turned into a trellis, an 8x10 patio, folks, and they're growing food and they've started their homestead journey. They're doing the best they can with what they've got. And when they tagged me in that and I saw that, you have no idea how excited I got, how jazzed up I got, what that did to reinvigorate me to keep doing what I'm doing. I just want to see more and more and more and more people doing things like that. And it really challenges me because I've got way more than an 8x10 patio. And I don't want to put myself down because I'm doing a lot of stuff here. But boy, it's just a challenge to me to keep doing what I'm doing and to keep trying to do a little bit better. It was just awesome. So check it out. Start Small Homestead on Instagram. It just excited me so much this week, and I hope it will be an encouragement to you as well. And if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of space to work with, do the best you can with what you got, which is what they're doing. Along with that, one of the things that I did do this week in an effort to try to help people who maybe don't have a lot of area to work with is I ordered a green stalk vertical planter. Now, Jack Polner just did a video about this over on his YouTube channel. I believe Don Bradner just posted some pictures of his family setting one up. And I know there's a lot of the big name YouTube people who have been doing the green stalk planters. but I wanted to do it myself, experiment it with myself from the standpoint of helping people who maybe have a small space like Start Small Homestead, who might benefit from something like this. Now, it's not cheap. It certainly is not cheap. And getting started with some of the things that they're using at Start Small Homestead, totes and containers and pots, certainly nothing wrong at all with that. But if you're looking for something that maybe is a little taller, maybe it's a little more aesthetically pleasing than totes filled with dirt, I'm going to trial it. So this is not an endorsement of that product whatsoever. I'm going to give it a go this season. And then next year, my plan is to give it a full-on review after I've gardened with it for a season. A couple of weeks ago, I was also at an auction here locally and was able to purchase some pop-up raised beds that might be perfect for people like Start Small Homestead who don't have ground that they can plant into, but might benefit from something that's quick, easy to set up. And so I'm going to be trialing that as well. And if that goes according to plan, I'll be sharing that with you to try to encourage people, even in small spaces, people who don't have ground to garden into. Maybe all you have is a deck or a patio. I want to help you get started on your journey towards self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability. So more to come on that. Follow us on Instagram, on Facebook if you don't already. I'll be sharing pictures of that. And then after I garden with it for a season, I will provide you with my honest assessment, and we'll see whether or not that might be a good fit for you. But what have we been doing here on 3B Farm and Homestead? Well, the first thing I want to share with you is that I finally got my stinking meat birds out of the garage and into the mobile coop. Now, funny story on that. On Monday, I came home at lunchtime. I was so excited. I pulled all of those chicks out. We put them in a tote, carried them out to the coop, kind of dumped them very carefully into the coop. I made a couple of trips, got everybody out there, was so excited, and all of a sudden my phone started blowing up. I hadn't checked the weather, and there were some serious thunderstorms inbound. In fact, so serious that schools in our area were canceling left and right, sending students home early, canceling after school activities. It was supposed to be a very major storm. And at this point, I'm headed back to work. All of my chicks are now out exposed. And I had actually delayed putting them out because of some storms over the weekend. Thankfully, I was able to get home before the storm hit. We moved all of the chicks back into the garage. The storm came through. It wasn't as bad as they had forecasted. For that, I was very thankful. But then we moved all of those stinkers back out into the mobile hoop coop. And oh, what a joy it is to have them out there. I've moved the coop 3 times this week so far, and I'll just have to start moving that a little bit more frequently as they get a little older and, well, they start pooping more and more and more. But thank God they're out of the garage. And my prayer and my hope is that is the last time that I brood chicks in my garage. On to the garden. And of course, as I've mentioned the last couple of podcasts, the garden is going to be a theme for the next several weeks. I spent quite a bit of time out in the garden this week getting things planted. I have all of the beds topped off now with some compost of ours. I did the last 2 beds today. My plan actually was to record the podcast earlier today, and then as things cooled off, I was going to top off the beds and do some more planting this evening. However, we have some serious thunderstorms inbound, according to the weatherman, this evening. And so I went ahead and opted to go out in the heat like a knucklehead, top off those beds, and I was able to get a few more things planted today, although not as much as what I had hoped to get planted. Yesterday, as I had mentioned earlier, it did get up into the mid 90s, but I knew it was going to happen. So I got up really early yesterday. By 7 o'clock, I had all my chores done and I was up in the garden getting things planted. And I planted things up until about 1 or 2 o'clock before it was just too beastly hot and I headed indoors. But all of that to say, right now in all of my raised beds, I have at least something planted. So I have 9 raised beds. I have something planted in every one of them. And hopefully tomorrow I will start putting my transplants out. I have not started putting out things like my peppers and my tomatoes, things like that, because I was just afraid with this heat wave coming through, they would just wilt and die. And so tomorrow, Lord willing, we'll go ahead and put those out, and I will finish planting the rest of the beds throughout the remainder of this week. And then I will move on up to the Ruth Stout bed. The Ruth Stout bed has a little bit more weeds than I had anticipated. I don't know if I just didn't top things off with hay as well as I should have. I actually had some burdock that was actually starting to sprout in my Ruth Stout bed, and I was able to pull that up yesterday. But hopefully this week we'll get the potatoes planted. I'll get my sweet potatoes planted. We'll get cucumbers planted. We'll get melons planted. And hopefully by Memorial Day weekend, we will have the garden fully planted and ready to go. At least that's the plan. One of the other exciting things for me this week was I actually was able to plant for the first time some seeds that I had saved. Now, it wasn't anything mind-blowing. It wasn't any seeds that are hard to save, but it still was very satisfying to plant seeds that you have saved yourself. I actually planted some okra that I had saved. I planted some runner beans, and I planted a type of dry bean. It's a black bean called Cherokee Trail of Tears. And so I'm just excited to see how they all come up, especially as compared to the ones that I purchased that I had left over. So that's going to be a very, very exciting thing for me to watch. And it certainly was very satisfying to plant some seeds that I had saved myself. First time I've ever done that, at least that I can recall. And it was, again, very, very satisfying. And there we go. Certainly a step in my sustainability journey. The last thing I wanted to share with you is I finally got the pig printable out this weekend. So I was able to finish that up. I got the resources page up, and I sent out the notice yesterday. So if you have not signed up for the Just the Basics series, certainly you want to do that so that you are notified each time I do release a new printable. I am going to take a couple of weeks off, although I know I took a couple of weeks off to get the pig printable out. It's been about a month, I think, since I released one of those. But if there is something that's particularly of interest to you, a guide that you have been waiting on, reach out to me, Brian at the homesteadjourney.net, and let me know that. And I will try to move it up in the queue. I really want this to be as helpful as possible to you. And so if there is a particular skill that you're interested in learning, reach out to me, Brian at the homesteadjourney.net, and I will try to make that happen. Before we head on over to this week's Charting the Course, I did want to mention a few things about the monetization of this podcast. You may have heard some ads, or if you haven't already, you may hear an ad run in this podcast episode. This is something new that was released this week by my podcast provider, Buzzsprout. I signed up for it as a way to try to monetize this podcast. Now, folks, my goal from this podcast is not and never has been to get rich. If that was my goal, then I have failed and failed very miserably. But what I am trying to do is I am trying to make the podcast pay for itself, just to cover my hosting costs, to try to cover various software programs that I use, hardware that I've had to purchase to produce this podcast. And so this is one of the avenues by which I'm hoping to do that. Now, if it's something that you find irritating or the ads that I'm running aren't things that are of interest to you, definitely provide me with that feedback. Brian at the homesteadjourney.net. I would love to hear from you either in favor or against this, but it is something that you will start hearing from time to time here on the podcast. This is a new program. It's kind of in beta. So we'll see whether or not they continue to do it long term, but I was able to qualify for it. So I did go ahead and sign up for it. And just let me know your thoughts. If you find it irritating, then we'll go a different direction. But also for your information, if you are interested in supporting this show, if you've gotten value from the show, there's a number of other ways that you can support the Homestead Journey podcast. I am starting to form some affiliate relationships with companies that I use and trust myself. And so in my blog posts, in my newsletters, and in the resource guides for the Just the Basic series, at times I have some affiliate links where if you buy through those, it does help support the show and it does help me to pay to continue to produce this podcast. And finally, the easiest way for you to support the show is through the Supporting Listeners program. If you head on over to thehomesteadjourney.net/support, you can find out more information about that. That does give you access to our private Discord server, a great group of individuals there as well. And so those are just some of the ways that you can support this show financially if you're inclined to do so. If you receive value through this show, certainly supporting me through those ads, affiliates, and the Supporting Listeners program would be greatly appreciated. With all of that said, let's head on over to this week's Charting the Course. Certainly over the last several years, there has been an explosion in popularity of the idea of people raising their own meat chickens. We had seen that prior to COVID, but certainly COVID, I think, took things to an entirely different level. But this year, the popularity of people raising their own chickens, combined with avian flu and supply chain constraints, all of this has led to some price increases. And so there are many people who have been questioning whether or not raising Cornish crosses from a sustainability perspective is the best approach when raising meat birds. And I think even before all of this came about, anybody that was relatively new to raising Cornish cross birds did eventually ask the question, is it possible for me to have a rooster and hens and hatch out my own meat birds? And the short answer to that question is that it's not possible to keep Cornish cross as breeders. And this is for several reasons. First of all, these birds have been bred to put on weight very, very rapidly, and they have been bred to have a short lifespan. Eventually, they outgrow their legs and their hearts. Now, I've heard of people who will kind of poo-poo this and they'll say, well, but I've been able to keep a Cornish cross alive for a couple of years. Well, good on you. But keep in mind that for a standard breed chicken, so things like buff Orpingtons and speckled Sussex and barred rocks and Rhode Island Reds, things of that nature, the average lifespan of those breeds is 5 to 10 years. So 2 years for Cornish cross really ain't all that great. But besides that, I've never heard of anybody that has successfully been able to breed a Cornish cross. And that's because of the body shape. The anatomy just doesn't match up. So even if you keep that chicken alive for 2 years, what's the point? You've got a Franken chicken with a voracious appetite that really isn't accomplishing much for you at all. But even if you were able to breed some Cornish cross chickens, they're not going to breed true because they're a hybrid. Now, what it means to breed true is that the offspring is going to have the characteristics of the parent stock. And because Cornish cross are actually, I believe, a 4-way cross, although really the true source of their genetics is a closely held secret. But because they are a hybrid, and again, like I said, I believe it's a four-way cross. They're not going to have the characteristics of the parents, even if they were able to reproduce. Now, some people will say, well, forget the Cornish cross. What you need to do is raise Ranger style meat birds. That's the alternative. That's the secret. Now, while their body shape is such that natural breeding is possible, it's also not recommended that they be kept for breeding purposes because they have been bred to put on weight, not as fast as the Cornish cross, but they have been bred to put on weight very quickly. And so you run the risk of a lot of health problems. But beyond that, they are also a hybrid bird. And as such, they're not going to breed true. And therefore, even if you're able to get them to a spot to where they're able to reproduce, your offspring are probably not going to have the characteristics that you're looking for. And so if establishing a Cornish cross or Ranger style breeding program isn't an option, what are our other options for a more sustainable meat bird? Many people will just tell you to raise a dual purpose bird. And while that certainly can be a viable option, a Cornish cross versus a standard breed, it's just apples and oranges as far as the final product that you're going to get. Now, what do I mean by a dual purpose bird? A dual purpose breed is really a breed that can be raised for both meat and eggs. Some of the more common breeds would be Barred Rocks, Orpingtons, Delawares, Rhode Island Reds, and the Sussexes. While these breeds eventually will reach weights of 4 or 5 pounds, like a Cornish cross, it certainly does take them much, much longer to get there. In fact, about 22 to 24 months on average to reach that level of meat. And even when they do reach that carcass weight, what you will find with the dual purpose breeds is there's nowhere near as much breast meat. The legs aren't as fat. And because they have been more active, they've been using their muscles more, and they've been active for a longer period of time, they are going to lend themselves to being a little bit more on the chewy side. Now, a couple of years ago, it seemed like all the rage in homesteading communities were the Brahma chickens. You may remember that video of that huge, or it appeared to be a huge chicken. There were some camera angles, I think, that played up the size of that chicken, but you may remember the video of that Brahma chicken coming out of the coop, and it just looked like it was ginormous. And Brahmas can get to rather large sizes. I think some of them can get like 8 pounds for a female and 10 pounds for a male. So they can be very, very large birds. But in order to reach that weight, it takes them about a year. So certainly much longer than the 8 weeks that the Cornish cross takes. Now, lately, it seems to me that the rage in homesteading circles has been the Bressie. The Bressie is a chicken that was well known in France. In fact, I think technically for it to be a Bressie, it needs to come from a particular region within France. It's a white chicken with a red comb and blue feet. And supposedly it is the best tasting chicken in the world. It's won many, many flavor contests. But a couple of things to be said about that. First of all, there is a particular methodology in which they feed them in order to get that flavor of meat. Some of that involves feeding them dairy, which if you don't have a ready supply of dairy, you're probably not going to get the same end product. But also beyond that, they are relatively expensive birds to get into, especially if you're going to buy very, very high quality stock. Allegedly, they can reach butchering weight at about 16 weeks. I don't know what size carcass you're going to get. I do know that they don't have the breast meat that a Cornish cross is going to have. And I've also read that some people have had issues with regards to several generations down the line, seen some weak genetics come to the top. And so from what I've read, again, I have not done this myself, so I can't speak to this firsthand. But what I have read is that in order to have a successful breeding program, you do need to periodically bring in fresh genetics to ensure that you don't end up with a very, very weak gene pool. Now, those are our options really from the standpoint of chicken. If we're not going to go the Cornish cross route, then we would need to look at a dual purpose breed. Obviously, there are other things that you could do, like raise rabbits or quail, but we're just going to stay with the idea of raising chickens. As I thought about a sustainable chicken meat operation, I started to think about some questions we need to ask ourselves. The first question I think we need to ask ourselves is simply why? Why do you want to move away from the Cornish cross? Is it that you're seeking to be prepared in the case we no longer can get Cornish cross? You know, the proverbial crap has hit the fan, society has melted down, supply chains are no longer operational, and we need to be able to put meat on the table. Is that your goal? Is your goal simply to save money? You see how much it costs to purchase the chicks and have them shipped, and you're like, forget this, I'd rather raise my own? Is it simply that you don't want to be dependent on anybody else? You want to be able to simply raise and grow your own food, and you want to have a system in place that is sustainable in order to do that? And only you can answer those questions. And there are no right or wrong answers to any of those questions. You need to do what is important to you. But let me just simply offer you a few words from my experience. One year I ordered a heavy breed cockerel assortment. I don't remember exactly what it was called, but it was an assortment of dual purpose cockerels, things like Rhode Island Reds, Buff Orpingtons, Speckled Sussex. I don't even remember all that was in there. And what I found is that it was a lot of work for a long time. And it cost me a lot of money because they're nowhere near as feed efficient as the Cornish cross. So if you're looking to do it to save money, certainly you're not going to be paying for the chicks or the shipping, but I really think in the long run, you're not going to see any savings. Now, if you're looking to do it from a sustainability perspective, you're wanting to be prepared in case of a meltdown, then certainly it's a viable way to go. But in my opinion, if you're looking to do it to save money, probably not the direction you want to go. The second question you really should ask is, what am I going to do with these chickens? Are these for my consumption? And if so, how do I like to cook them? Or are we planning on selling these to other people? And the reason why I raise this point is because standard breed chickens need to be cooked differently than a Cornish cross. Again, because they use their muscles more for a longer period of time, their meat is going to be a bit on the tougher side. They don't grill or bake or fry as well as a Cornish cross is going to. Also, as I've mentioned before, they have far less breast meat. So if your family is a family that really, really likes breast meat, they're going to be very disappointed with a dual purpose bird. And quite frankly, they're going to be disappointed with most Ranger style birds. They simply don't have those large plump breasts that the Cornish cross is known for. And so if you think about that and your plan is to sell these to other people, not only are you going to need to charge more because your feed costs are going to be more, and certainly the amount of time that you put into this operation is going to be far more, but you're going to need to educate your customers on the difference as far as how these birds should be cooked and the fact that they don't have as much breast meat. The third question you need to ask is, how much time and how much area do you have to dedicate to raising meat chickens? And also you need to ask yourself, are you allowed to have roosters where you live? If you go with a breed other than the Cornish cross, more than likely the cockerels will start crowing before you process them. Also, keep in mind that standard breeds are going to require more land and more frequent moving, or they will moonscape your pastures and your lawn. 20 to 24 weeks is 4 times as long for the same amount of meat, more labor, and perhaps more feed. Now, I know some people will say, well, just free range them. And certainly that's an option, but the more you free range them and the longer time it takes, the more opportunity you have to lose chickens to predators. And the more chickens you lose to predators, the more it costs you to raise the same amount of meat. And so where does that leave us? Well, this is what we've chosen to do here on our homestead. As long as I can, I am going to continue to order and raise the Cornish cross. It's far more feed efficient, and it takes far less time, and it takes far less space in order for us to realize a good amount of meat. But I also make sure I keep a heavy breed rooster on hand at all times, just in case I need him. Because if the proverbial poop hits the fan, at that point, I don't care how chewy the chicken is. I'll just be thankful to have chicken on my plate. I hope this has been helpful to you folks. If you have any further questions, reach out to me, Brian at thehomesteadjourney.net. And until next time, everybody, keep up the good work.